Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Jason Nort, the Fuel Management Officer for DC's Department of Public Works, and Maureen Holman, the Vice President of Shared Services at DC Water. And we're going to talk about an initiative to get vehicles running on biodiesel fuel. These are the fleet vehicles, right, Jason? These are the larger vehicles that we see on the road. Is that it?
Yes, that is correct, Nick. The biodiesel fuel we utilize in a heavy-duty space. It's technology that is readily available today. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions as well as carbon pollutants.
And is it a really significant difference between biodiesel fuel and traditional fuel? Is it noticeable, significant?
Absolutely. I would say about an 80% difference in reduction in pollutants, and it definitely improves air quality in the city.
Well, that's a good thing for everybody.
Absolutely.
And you say it reduces pollutants. I suppose that's why it's become a priority. That's the main thing, right?
Definitely. It aligns with the mayor's initiatives as well as the Climate Action Plan. And we just want to make DC a cleaner place for our residents and employees.
And Maureen, can you talk about the importance that DC Water has placed on getting its fleet transitioned to biodiesel? Why did that start, and where are you within the process of transitioning to biodiesel?
Well, similarly to DPW, we have large vehicles and heavy equipment that right now can't be electrified, which is one of the main ways in which obviously lots of fleets are trying to meet carbon reduction goals and some of those air quality benefits. In the heavy vehicle space, that technology isn't quite commercially available, so the biodiesel really gives us the ability to, as Jason was saying, provide those air quality benefits and a better operational environment for our maintenance operators and for our drivers. We've got all manner of trucks that have, CCTV attached to them and all sorts of things that we've got to have in every part of the city. So having a cleaner vehicle really makes us able to provide, we think, better environment and better air quality for our residents. We've been operating biodiesel for at least a decade, if not longer. It started out as B20 and then kind of increased, and now it's 100% biodiesel, 100% green fuel, and it really is something that works in our heavy vehicles.
When you say heavy vehicles, I think about the DC Department of Public Works. Obviously, you have any number of heavy vehicles. We all see those. When it comes to DC Water, obviously, you do have large vehicles, but probably not as many as DC's Department of Public Works. Still, it's become a focus to get those to be less polluting, correct?
Absolutely, and under the mayor's clean energy plans and things, we're focusing our light vehicle fleet to try to get it to be electrified by the mayor's goals. But on the heavy vehicle side, we've got anywhere between 350 to 400 vehicles that we still want to make more environmentally friendly, still want to have as green as possible. And so right now that B100 is a great transition fuel for us to make sure that we're doing what we can to support the mayor's objectives while still making sure that our trucks can do what we need them to do to provide those critical services.
So Jason, what kind of vehicles are we talking about here? When we think about DC's Department of Public Works, we think about maybe salt trucks, things of that nature.
That is correct, Nick.
Yeah.
Refuse trucks, plow trucks. We use B100 more in a heavy space. It doesn't require the electrical infrastructure if we were to move to electric vehicles in a heavy space. So it's more of a benefit as of today and requires less funding and less resources to move to electrical space in heavy-duty vehicles.
And where are you in the process of getting more and more vehicles transitioned to the biodiesel fuel? Are you maybe somewhere in the middle of your long-term goals? Are you toward the end of the long-term goals, at the beginning? Walk us through the timeline and where you're at with that.
We're in the beginning stages. We're up to just above 100 trucks, heavy-duty trucks, and we want to eventually convert our entire heavy-duty fleet over to B100.
Okay, when you say B100, can you explain just a little bit what that means? I think probably people outside of the expertise that you're in with fuel management, maybe they don't know exactly what that means. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, of course. B100 is 100% biodiesel,
okay,
whereas our regular fuels that we usually use in the diesel space are 5% and 20%, but they also have different blends as USLD, traditional ultra-low sulfur diesel.
Okay, well, Maureen, why is it important to focus on this? What is it about sustainability? Is it about being environmentally friendly? I guess it's all of the above, right? Why is it so important, would you say?
Well, it is all of the above, and it does align with DC Water's strategic plan. We've got a Blueprint 2.0 that focuses on things related to resiliency and sustainability and equity. And really, it hits on all of those different pieces. If we have a healthy operational fleet that's in our different communities and in our spaces, we know that we're not polluting as much as we would if we were using traditional fossil fuels or traditional petroleum-based products. And so by reducing some of that particulate matter, reducing some of that NOx and SOx and some of those things, you do get some really good localized air benefits, which we think are important for our residents and for our ratepayers. And at the same time, you also get the benefits of having a type of fuel that is a diesel fuel. It's just coming from a different source than petroleum. And so the engines work the same, the maintenance requirements are the same, and it's a really familiar kind of operation for the drivers, which is critical for us as well.
And you talked about some of the mechanics of that. Does this require a completely different vehicle? I suppose it would, right?
It requires a slightly modified engine.
Okay.
And that's really what we're talking about. So it's a slight upcharge,
okay,
but long term that definitely gives us the benefits that we want from the environmental pieces, the air quality pieces, and again, making sure that we've got a reliable, commercially viable vehicle that we can keep running for our services.
And Jason, is it more difficult to find a place to fill up with biodiesel? Is that the sort of thing that is just a specially designed area for the city to have a fill-up area for biodiesel? How do you go about filling up these vehicles when you're using this different kind of fuel?
Well, Nick, we had to acquire separate tanks. We started with a pilot program with a smaller 1,000-gallon tank. As the project grew, we took on several additional tanks, including 3 12,000-gallon above-ground storage tanks.
Okay. And was that a big undertaking? That sounds like a lot of equipment.
It required a lot of planning and strategically thinking things through, permitting, things of that nature, but it still was significantly cheaper than taking the electrification route at this time.
And so, Maureen, is that the same area that the vehicles from DC Water go to?
Yes, actually. DC Water relies on DPW and the economies of scale and some of the large contracts and fueling contracts that they have to provide fuel for our vehicles too. So we leverage DPW locations to access that B100 product.
When we talk about biodiesel being cleaner and more environmentally friendly, the first thing I think about is diesel and big puffs of smoke on the road, and it doesn't smell good and that sort of thing. So with biodiesel, is it completely different? Is it 100% different? Jason, let's start with you on that. When, like, let's say a driver of one of these vehicles, what's the reaction they have when they first start driving a biodiesel vehicle versus a traditional vehicle? Can they immediately tell the difference?
Yes, I'm sure they can. Being that the B100 fuel is derived from renewable resources, the driver will instantly notice a significance in the air quality within his truck. Like you mentioned, less soot, less visible carbon coming from the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a very beneficial experience, and you tend to notice it immediately.
Mm-hmm. Maureen, have you heard specifically from people who operate these vehicles, or have you heard a general reaction from within DC Water that, wow, these vehicles are much nicer to actually have around than traditional vehicles?
It is actually. For some of our operations, we're not just driving the vehicles. They might be parked in a specific location, cleaning a catch basin or doing something else for a little while. And so while that vehicle is in operation and doing some service to our assets, it's running. And the fact that it's not emitting that exhaust and it's not emitting that soot while they're sitting there and working in that environment makes it a lot healthier for our employees as well as for the residents.
I'm wondering about the dynamic between DC's Department of Public Works and DC Water on this. Would you say it's a unique cooperation that you all have on this specific initiative, or are we seeing this in other areas around the country, or what would you say? Is it specific to the DC region on that?
We're a little unique in that DC Water used to be a part of the Department of Public Works. Mm-hmm. So as a district agency, we have a lot of overlap in some of our operations and in some of the things that we do. So for example, DC Water will get involved sometimes in snow team efforts and in doing things like that. Salt, certain supplies, fuels, things of that nature, we still collaborate with almost as if we were still a city agency to get those economies of scale, which
nice.
I think is probably a little unique.
Right.
But around the country, these are things that utility fleets and municipal fleets are facing. You know, the electrification push and how in the whole area of heavy vehicles do we try to meet some of those environmental goals and bring some of those benefits while still making sure it's commercially viable, because we can't have that trash truck or that catch basin truck go down.
And we will definitely talk about the electrification part of all this. That's a very interesting aspect of it. I'm just wondering, do you think that unique relationship that the DPW and DC Water has, does that make it easier for DC Water to work on this initiative? You think that unique relationship?
I think a little bit. It also allowed us, we are in partnership with a few other groups in getting a couple of Diesel Error Reduction Act grants, DERA grants that the US EPA provides to give us additional funding to make those conversions to the cleaner B100 engines and things. And so being able to join on, grant proposals and things like that always makes your case stronger, and I think brings us a better benefit and hopefully more funding.
So Jason, when you look to maybe other agencies, being the fuel management officer, you probably learn from other agencies, maybe around the country, maybe elsewhere around the region. Is there any specific knowledge or particular piece of information that you've gathered when you look around, try to learn lessons that has helped you with this biodiesel effort? Have you learned things from other places?
Yes. As Maureen has mentioned, we work with different organizations. For example, the Greater Washington Region Clean Cities Coalition, who helps us to get a better understanding of some of these available technologies in our region.
Mm-hmm. And Jason, given the fact that the DPW is so loaded with these big vehicles, I was thinking that earlier. It's like you think about big, heavy-duty vehicles, and you really think about the DPW, whether it's in DC or any other city. This is the agency that runs these big vehicles. What's the mood within the agency when you think about you're moving toward a more sustainable fleet? Is there maybe encouragement, hope for the future, that sort of thing? Like what is the overall feeling that you get within the agency knowing that you're making this move to become a more sustainable agency?
I would agree with what you said, Nick. I think it's very encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Our people are very optimistic about the opportunity to learn a new technology. It's exciting for our technicians as well as our operators as we move towards a more sustainable, energy-efficient technology.
And we mentioned the reduction of pollutants. Are there any other things that come to mind, any other benefits that come to mind when you think about switching to a biodiesel vehicle? What's so good about it in the environment? What is so good about that?
The renewable resources, as I mentioned before, also a cost savings. Now, it's a significant delta in between the traditional fuel and the B100. However, you do recover that through the course of the life cycle. Just the burn rate on the fuel itself is different in a significant way. So, yeah.
In what way would you say? The burn rate, meaning does it last longer than traditional fuel? Is that what you mean?
The combination of the vehicle switching over to B100 once the engine reaches a warm operating temperature,
mm-hmm.
It just reduces the gallons per minute that is burned on the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially you get more out of it?
Yes.
Okay. So obviously specific numbers are going to be tough here, but can you ballpark it for me, like number of hours per vehicle based on when you have to fill up? Do you have like a ballpark estimation on
it's safe to
number
say
of hours?
about a 15% increase.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
15% increase, meaning you get 15% more time with the biodiesel fuel.
Correct.
That's what you mean.
Correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And how significant is that?
That's pretty significant when we talk an annual performance, of a vehicle.
You add it all up and then you look at it and...
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You do your miles per gallon cost and you review the data after a certain amount of time.
So, Maureen, getting back to how people feel about it, at DC Water, what has that done to, when you look at the fleet, what has that done to your colleagues and everything? It must make you feel good about the future, make you feel good that you're moving in the right direction, I suppose, right?
Well, I think definitely, Nick, but also it allows the folks within our fleet team to feel like they're part of some of the larger sustainable solutions that DC Water is putting forth in the community. We obviously have a lot of work on the water side and things of that nature. And so for our fleet team to be able to see directly some of the changes that they're making that contribute to whether it's our carbon reduction, some of our greenhouse gas goals, or just, again, those health benefits, it really does make them feel, I think, good about the work they're doing and good about how they're contributing to their community. The other element of this is that what we're talking about are new technologies or newer technologies that also are great from a workforce development standpoint. Getting people involved in some of these alternative fuels, what it takes to maintain some of these engines and some of the new technologies that can continue to come down the path in the fleet space, I think also leads to a lot of excitement within some of the folks in the fleet department.
Would you say it costs a lot to switch to biodiesel? I know that that's a subjective term, costs a lot, but is it a costly project to move from traditional fuel to biodiesel, would you say?
It's actually not that costly at all, other than that upfront cost with the engine and making the modifications to the engine, which again, thanks to the EPA grant and other sources, that cost is being offset. It's really the operational cost of the vehicle for the lifespan of the vehicle, and that cost hasn't changed at all, because the great part about biodiesel is that it doesn't require us to change any of our maintenance equipment or any of our other pieces of equipment that we might need to monitor and track the performance of the vehicle. It's still a diesel engine. And so at its heart, it still requires a lot of the same types of maintenance and operations that the traditional engine does, but with all the environmental benefits.
So Jason, were you with the DPW when they decided that this was something that you all were going to focus on? Were you with that when that idea came to fruition? You were there?
Yes, I was.
And what did you think about it when you first started hearing about it? You were all going to focus on this.
I thought it was a great opportunity. I was with the organization when we initially decided to use B20, and I saw some of the challenges that we faced with that. So when they upwinded our team that B100 was an option, we were definitely excited about the opportunity to learn a new technology.
Did you maybe think that it would be a big project ahead? Or you said you were excited, but it must have been like, oh, this is a whole nother avenue we're going to go down now.
Yes. We were curious to see how it would work, being that, at 100% bio, it would have to be heated, not to gel, in freezing temperatures. So it was definitely a concern of ours. So when we saw it actually work and tested it during the pilot program, we were definitely glad to see that it was a efficient technology.
So you had a pilot program before you started using these vehicles?
Yes, that's correct.
In earnest. Okay.
We started with a small amount of trucks. I think it was about 4 or 5, and they did so well that we decided to invest further and acquire more vehicles in our fleet.
And how far back was that?
I would say about a decade or so, like Maureen had mentioned earlier.
Okay, so yeah, you've been working on this for a while. Was it also a pilot program at DC Water, or did you wait for the pilot program there first?
Well, again, we can learn from some of the things that they're working on, and some of the challenges that they had to work through are things like, the fuel availability and making sure it's a consistent stock, and just, some of those challenges when something new comes onto the market versus almost a decade later when it's, a tried and true type of technology and a type of product. So we will do pilots for any of our large pieces of equipment, just because we can't completely convert something over. It also gives our drivers, our operators, and our maintenance folks an opportunity to kind of test things out and make sure that it's ready for prime time, or maybe it's a good technology, but it's not quite tested yet. There's still a few kinks, and so it might be something that we wait another year or two before we start purchasing in earnest.
Are you able to say what percentage of your fleet has been switched to biodiesel as of now?
I would say, so we're smaller numbers, much smaller numbers than DPW, and I would say, I don't have the exact number, but it's a couple of dozen vehicles that we have right now, and we still have another 12 to 15, I believe, that are coming in under existing grants.
And how many vehicles would you say, just an estimation, not an exact number, but you say a couple dozen on biodiesel, and do you have hundreds of vehicles?
We have about 400 pieces of heavy equipment,
Okay.
So it's roughly whatever 50 into 400 would be. That's roughly where we're at right now.
Right.
And targeting certain types of trucks that we have. So we have certain hydrant trucks and certain other trucks that are a lot easier for us to switch over in terms of just the weight and some of the energy that each truck needs to do its specific task.
And the goal is to continue to increase that number, I suppose.
Yes, we continue to increase that number of biodiesel while also continuing to evaluate, all other alternative fuels that might be available to us now or well into the future. You've mentioned the electric infrastructure. That's a huge challenge for us. And so before we could even consider doing anything with our fleet, we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to make sure that we'd be able to power it. And so some of those challenges are still in the planning stages, whereas a product like B100, we don't have to worry about that. Those systems are already in place.
So Jason, the same question. Do you have a ballpark estimation, again, on the percentage of vehicles that you've switched to biodiesel based on all your vehicles?
Yes, Nick, we're sitting at about 20% that we've converted at this time, and we're looking to get to 60 or 70 in maybe 3 or 4 years or so.
And Maureen was talking about the number of vehicles DC Water has. How many vehicles would you say the DPW has?
It's similar in a heavy-duty space. We're sitting around 500.
500, okay. And so that 20% number, that's pretty good, right? That's pretty significant. Yeah. And like, how would you characterize that 20% number?
How would I characterize it?
Yeah, like
I think
a
it's
lot of work to do still, or a good start.
A lot of work to do, but we're still getting a nice impact in a short amount of time. So yeah, definitely reducing that carbon footprint.
Great. I do want to talk about the electric part of this, because that is, when you think about reducing pollutants, I think if you were to poll a certain number of people, you'd probably find that maybe the majority would say electric is the way to go. So why not go to electric? Why focus on biodiesel? It's a great question for both of you. So let's start with Jason. Jason, why the biodiesel? Why not electric? What are some of the issues with electric?
I would say cost savings and the amount of time that it would take to implement it. With the Optimus Technologies B100 system, is sitting around $25K to make the modification to the existing truck. Whereas with electrification, to get the heavy duty asset, you're looking at $500K and up. Not to mention the electrical infrastructure that you have to put in place with additional panels and things of that nature.
So $500,000 per vehicle, is that what you just said?
End up.
And so, I mean, that doesn't even sound realistic. I had no idea what you were going to say. I can't believe that number is that high.
Well, Nick, you have to consider the fact that the heavy duty space is not necessarily there.
Okay,
in
so
the
that makes
same
sense, right?
way
Okay.
that the light duty space is at this time. So it may take a little bit of time to get there as far as plow trucks, refuse trucks. You got to consider having your heat on or air conditioning. All of that electrical draw kind of reduces the battery availability in the asset.
Right, because I know Tesla recently came out with a cyber truck, I think it's called, right?
Oh, wow.
Okay, so Tesla's got a Cybertruck, and that was a big deal, right? That was like a truck. But you're talking about, what, a garbage truck? That's completely different.
Two different
way,
things.
way bigger.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, Maureen, has the issue of electrification come up a lot within DC Water, would you say?
Yes.
It continues to come up?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, the mayor has very clear goals when it comes to electrifying the fleet. And in the focus there is on public transportation and, in some of those areas, I think, because those are more commercially viable. But I think that also, kind of to Jason's point, it's that the heavy vehicle space doesn't really have the technology right now, or not the commercially available technology where you'd be able to order dozens and dozens of vehicles and get them delivered in a timely fashion. There's the electrical draw. I don't think people realize that a lot of our heavy vehicles are not just huge and heavy, so the weight is a huge issue, but it's the activity that is happening in and around these trucks. Again, we have some vehicles that have multiple CCTV cameras attached to them, other types of monitors, other types of systems and equipment, all of which is a huge electrical draw that you need to consider, what kind of battery storage you would have to put in these things. And I think that if they can get to the point where they can solve that problem on the semi-truck side, the 18-wheeler, where they're having similar issues in terms of the size of the battery versus the size of, the load and things like that, the technology will eventually get there, but it's just not ready for us right now. So from DC Water's perspective, we then look at everything else that we can do in order to, again, support those environmental goals. So on our light fleet side, we do have inspection, sedans and things like that. We'll be converting them over to electric and working to build out our electric infrastructure. But the heavy vehicle and even the medium vehicle space, it's just not quite there yet.
Do you have electric vehicles currently within DC Water?
We have some hybrid vehicles. We do not have any 100% plug-ins, but we've been integrating different hybrid vehicles into our fleet over the last, I would say, 5-10 years or so. Again, just to give our operators and our drivers just a little bit of a flavor and experience for what they might like or not like about whether a particular make, model. And we have noticed even some challenges with those. We have, even in our light vehicle spaces, we have geotabs and other kinds of telematics that tell us how the vehicles are operating. That's all an energy draw. And so trying to balance some of those needs is always a constant challenge.
So Jason, you're talking about $500,000 per vehicle. Obviously that's impossible, right? I mean, that's not possible.
That makes it very difficult with our budget, yes.
Yeah, so was there ever a time where the DPW really studied this issue and made that determination to come to that number and say absolutely not? Was there actually a study where you all took a really hard look at electrification?
We had to consider our goals as well as what was readily available at this time. And meeting with organizations like GRRCCC and Optimus Technology showed us that there is existing technology that we can utilize today and not have to make any modifications to our infrastructure, no additional transformers or things of that nature.
Let's say cost wasn't an issue. Okay, let's say you were able to get a whole fleet of electric vehicles and it wasn't $500,000 per vehicle or whatever. Cost is not an issue. Then you deal with, as you touched on this, the infrastructure in place to charge all of these vehicles. Is that infrastructure there? Let's say the cost, put aside the cost, is the infrastructure there to be able to charge these vehicles?
That's a good question. The bottom line would be that B100 comes from renewable resources, whereas electrical energy comes from natural gas and other elements. So it's all about what's the cleaner resource that we're using and what would be more beneficial for the residents and visitors and employees of the District of Columbia.
And it would be difficult, I would imagine, to keep those big trucks that you use charged, being able to run. Maureen was mentioning all the different elements of the vehicles. That would be a big challenge also if you had all electric vehicles, I would imagine.
Yes, reliability is definitely something to consider. The plow, the existing hydraulic system on a diesel vehicle. Would this be able to run off a battery and for how long?
So you have plows on biodiesel currently? Okay.
We have plows as well as refuse trucks that have the packing system.
Okay.
And these are working very well, no interruptions in operational performance. It's pretty much the same as traditional diesel.
And the plows are really important. I mean, get into the winter time, everybody wants their roads cleaned, so it's really important, I would imagine, to have an effective fleet of plows as well, right?
Yes.
Are all your plows on biodiesel right now?
No, not at this time, but we do have a significant amount along with the Department of Transportation.
And so individual types of vehicles, Maureen, when we're talking about DC Water, the Department of Public Works has the plows, those other vehicles we're talking about. What specific vehicles are on biodiesel within DC Water?
A lot of our, some of our hydrant trucks, so they look sort of like pickup trucks, but with much larger cabs in the back and with a lot of equipment. They're the ones that go out and perform hydrant flow testing, inspections, and things throughout the city. And they have various pieces of equipment there if they need to make minor repairs and things of that nature. We also have our catch basin cleaning trucks, our vac trucks, and so very, very critical for both the health of the environment, but also to prevent flooding. So that's something that is very critical. Those catch basins catch the runoff from our roads, and so if they're clogged or there's any problems with that, that can lead to some backups and things. We have other large trucks, like I mentioned, some of our CCTV trucks. These are sewer inspection trucks that have huge pieces of equipment on the back that you can put down into the linear assets and to do various inspections, and in some cases even some repair work. So that's an example of some of the trucks that we have right now that are using the B100. And I think that it's a proven technology, it's providing us everything that we need, and we know that we can rely upon it. Because both from the services perspective, but also from the operator perspective, nobody wants to be in a vehicle if they're worried about its reliability, if they're worried about its breaking down somewhere on the corner of F Street somewhere here in the district. So it needs to be able to work, and it needs to be able to work 24/7, 365. One thing I wanted to mention that Jason had alluded to when it comes to electrification, the source of the energy for those electric systems is really critically important. And right now, a lot of our distribution energy coming in from Pepco is still fossil fuels and things like that. And so you need to start to also look at, not that we've done any deep work in this at DC Water, but you need to look about how you're maybe shifting some of those issues and shifting pollutants to other communities, as opposed to sort of resolving those things immediately. And so I think there's a solution there, more solar, more renewable energy getting into the electric grid, which certainly could be a great tool for us to have in terms of some charging stations and things. But from a big picture perspective, you need to look at where that energy is ultimately coming from and whether you're shifting the burdens to other communities.
This conversation about the electrification part of it, I think is really interesting because you're talking about, first of all, it's prohibitively expensive. And then the idea of the massive infrastructure you need to charge vehicles like this, if you talk to the general public, like I said earlier, I think a lot of people would say, we'll just switch to electric. Why are you doing biodiesel? But it's really not, it's not like flipping a switch. It's not even there. The technology, we've got so much great technology, but that particular part of our world is just not ready. And it just doesn't sound ready. Does that sound right?
Well, an average member of the public is looking at their Tesla, you know,
Yeah.
or looking at their neighbors or their, you know, what have you's Tesla. And again, in the light vehicle space, in personal passenger vehicles, it's an entirely different situation, both from the availability of the technology. You know, it's now been multiple years now that some of these things have rolled out, so, you know, the cost is going down. But also, if you're an average homeowner, you know, you plug it in. Like even on my street here in Washington, D.C., you see the cords that come out, you know, that are plugging them in. And for your average user in a personal vehicle, that's perfectly fine for them. You know what I mean? And that will meet all of their needs for their operations or for their running errands or wherever they need to go. But for a municipal fleet, for a utility fleet that needs to be ready 24/7, 365, we can't guarantee that we can just leave it plugged in overnight and, you know, we'll pick it up in the morning. Yes,
that's a good point. So Jason, you've mentioned several times, it's not just the Department of Public Works that has this initiative. You mentioned it comes from the mayor's office. It's a citywide sort of thing. What is exactly coming from the mayor's office with regard to the biodiesel part of this? Is it an initiative that was handed down by the mayor's office? Is it a plan that you all came together and you came up with? Where does that come from, the part about the mayor's office that you were talking about earlier?
The mayor has several strategic initiatives in play, and one of them is not necessarily biodiesel fuel, but alternative fuels as a whole. And we want to reach 100% alternative vehicles by 2045. And that'll be done in several phases. As soon as 2030, I think the percentage is around 40, 50% or so. I couldn't be wrong about that, but it's a phased approach to reaching 100% alternative fuel vehicles by 2045.
And when you say 100% alternative vehicles, you're not just referring to your agency, the Department of Public Works. You're referring to the city?
This is for the district government as a whole.
Okay. And how would you describe that goal? Is that going to be a tough goal to meet? Are you on a good path to it? What do you think?
I believe we're on a good path to reaching that goal. 2045, yeah, we're trending towards meeting that goal.
And of course, when you say based on what we've already talked about, alternative vehicles could mean a lot of different things, right?
That could mean a lot of things, Nick. That could be electric vehicles, B100 vehicles, natural gas, renewable diesel, all type of things.
Do you see any of these problems, or I shouldn't say problems, challenges? Do you see these challenges with electrification going away in the near future? Do you think like in 10 years it's going to be easy to have an electrified huge truck like you guys have? Do you think it'll be easier, or do you think that this challenge or these challenges that we've been talking about are going to be lingering for a while based on where the technology is headed? What do you think?
That's a good question, Nick. But I do think with more testing, more trial and error, more pilot programs, that we will get more data to achieve these goals when it comes to electrification.
So you think maybe the challenges will become less?
Lessen, yes.
Less over
That's
time.
Correct.
What do you think, Maureen? Is this something that DC Water has thought about in terms of maybe the near future electrification will be easier? Maybe not. Maybe we shouldn't invest so much in biodiesel based on where the technology is headed. These are all different kinds of challenges related to the same topic, right? It's foreseeing what's coming next, right?
Well, if I could really do that, I would probably be in a different
We don't have a crystal
position.
ball.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, as with any technology, whether it be electrification or anything like that, like certainly as more people adopt it, as more people test it out, and more commercial entities get involved in producing it, it should become cheaper and more efficient and more reliable. And we certainly expect to see that in the vehicle space. I think that the important thing to remember, and you know, when you're talking about vehicle fleets such as ours, is that there is sort of a window for when we're acquiring vehicles and how long we have them and when we plan to dispose of them. So the vehicles that I'm acquiring right now today that are B100 vehicles still only have a 7 to 10 year lifespan. And that's if we drive them really well and nothing happens to them. And so sort of thinking about that and thinking about that future, we know that we will have another, you know, we will know that we were constantly renovating our fleet, constantly replacing our fleet. And so as those replacements come up, we can make really strategic decisions about the type of technology. And since we have only invested, the B100 investment is only in the vehicle itself. Even the infrastructure that DPW has, those additional tanks and things could easily be converted to other types of liquid fuel and things of that nature. So it's really the vehicle itself that DC Water is investing in, and we're planning to replace that anyway in 7 to 10 years. And when we do, maybe it's with another biodiesel product because it's not quite there yet. Maybe it's with electrification. Maybe it's a pilot project for hydrogen, or who knows what other types of technologies might be coming available or coming online.
So Jason, what's your hope for the near future with all of this? Do you have I know you mentioned the mayor's goals and the initiative that you all are focused on, but what is your hope exactly? You're the fuel management officer for the DPW. What do you hope happens in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years with all this?
I hope that we're able to achieve the goal quicker than what we're aiming for. I would like to achieve this by 2040, but it's going to take strategic planning and a team effort by the District of Columbia government.
Any particular items come to mind when you think about accelerating that goal? How you might do that?
Strategic planning, along with other hands getting involved. As Maureen mentioned, the more people that are involved on these projects, testing and data and trial and error, the faster that we can advance.
And you mentioned that a grant was really helpful to DPW, right? The grant from the EPA, was that it?
Yes, it's a Diesel Error Reduction Act grant that DC Water and DPW have received through the Greater Washington Clean Cities Coalition, and actually we've received one through the National Biodiesel Foundation as well. Those two entities have really helped us with some of the grant application and some of the monitoring and the tracking and things, because we're a fleet organization, not necessarily a grants organization, and so having that outside support to leverage additional data or additional funding is huge for us. And so it really does help us make those investments in some of those areas where we might not have traditionally.
Yeah, Jason, when the district's Department of Public Works is looking at funding a big project like turning vehicles from traditional to biodiesel, how effective are grants in that area? I suppose it could be very helpful.
They're very effective, Nick. We try to budget our resources in a strategic way, so any opportunity that we have for additional help is always beneficial for our organization.
Do you think the public in general in DC knows enough about the switch to biodiesel? Do you wish that was more publicized and more people knew about it? Or do you think that it's been put out to the public enough? That's what we're trying to do here, obviously, also. But
we've been trying to educate the public through events with the Clean Fuels Alliance. We have Truck Touch, an annual Truck Touch, where kids and families can come out and see the different vehicles that we have, alternative fuel vehicles that we have in our fleet. So yes, we try to communicate these things with the public and let them know that we are trying to make DC a safer and cleaner place.
Do you wish that more of the public knew these details about, like we were talking about, electrification is not yet possible, we're doing the next best thing? So do you wish more people knew about that?
Yes, but it's our job to educate them and keep them involved on what we're doing. That way they get a better understanding of these new technologies and also the direction that we're moving.
So you have to do a lot. I mean, you have to work on these goals and as well as educate the public. You say there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. It's not just only working on the biodiesel. You also have to get the message out, right?
That's correct, Nick. That's our job as public officials, to upwind the community and make sure that things are working out for their best interest.
I suppose to a lesser extent the DC water vehicles are seen by the general public, since the DPW is always out there doing things on the road and everything. But how about you, Maureen? Would you say that you hope that the public would know more about this and that things like this are a good thing to get the message out?
Oh, absolutely. And many of our vehicles are out in public space, just similarly to the DPW vehicles. And we've actually found them to be a really wonderful teaching tool in and of themselves. We've used our vehicles and we've wrapped them around with some of our drink tap messages in the past. And now we do have several vehicles that are wrapped with the B100 logo and with some information on them. And even just having them drive around the city just to get people just sort of aware or even familiar with the concept, I think is a good start.
Outside of DC, would you say, let's say nationwide, that most people really don't know quite what biodiesel is? That's what occurred to me at the onset of this conversation. I was thinking, I know what biodiesel is because you both told me. But before this, I hear the word diesel and I just think traditional diesel. It doesn't even occur to me necessarily that that's a different thing, you know?
It's probably not a product that the average consumer is familiar with because it's not available for your average passenger vehicle.
Right,
You know, it's
right.
dedicated to such a sort of certain area of the market and in the transportation and transit space. So it doesn't surprise me. And getting back to your point, it's our role to sort of educate about the benefits of those things, the public health benefits, and to make people understand that, you know, the electrification or the push in that direction, it's one tool to get us to a much more healthier and sustainable future in transit.
That's interesting. It's not available to the general public, right? You can't go to the gas station and get biodiesel in your vehicle, right?
At this time, 100% biodiesel is not readily available at public stations, but eventually anything is possible.
So let's say a truck driver out there with a biodiesel truck, they have to go to a very special place. They can't go to like just a regular gas station, basically.
That's correct.
Okay.
Our vehicles don't go to regular gas stations
No.
anyway.
Right, because you got the separate system that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that is, you said anything's possible, but how likely do you think that would be in the near future that someone who drives a big truck would just be able to find, hey, there's a biodiesel station right there?
With the benefits of B100 and, you know, when you consider a public trucking fleet, I see it happening in the near future.
Is it difficult to make biodiesel relative to traditional fuel? Does more go into it?
No, I would think it's easier. I've been to several facilities where they process and make the B100 fuel, and it literally comes from, you know, used cooking oil, animal fats, things of that nature. Looks like one big mess if you ask me, but it's a very beneficial one.
Well, and the starting products, those animal fats and cooking oils and things, don't have some of the pollutants that you would find in some of the base petroleum products going into regular fuel. So,
Okay. So bottom line is, it is very possible that we're going to see more biodiesels, maybe even be educated more in the general public around the country about what biodiesel is. That's a possibility, you think?
Yes, absolutely. And I've been noticing a lot of conferences, you know, educating people on some of the available technology in the heavy space.
How new is biodiesel when you look at maybe the last 15, 20 years? When did it really start coming around and get on your radar? When would you say? Was it relatively recently or a while ago?
I may be telling my age here. I would say when I first came in the industry about 15 years ago.
About 15 years ago, and you started hearing about it for the first time then, and it's just grown?
That's correct.
Okay.
And it seems like the percentage of the biodiesel increased significantly over time.
Okay. So, Maureen, what does the future look like for these big trucks that we see driving down the road? What's the future? We talked about electrification. We talked about biodiesel. What do you think is the future for these trucks? I mean, we don't have that crystal ball we were talking about, but what do you think? What's the future?
So dream scenario, you know,
Yes.
if we really wanted to push it,
Yes, please.
would be that each individual vehicle would provide its own energy.
Okay.
So they
like
wouldn't
kinda
need to necessarily be tied. So one of the critical issues with reliability, whether it's electric or any fuel, is that you need to go back to a specific location in order to find that energy to fuel your vehicle. In a dream, you know, future state of reliability and sustainability, imagine a huge heavy piece of equipment covered in solar panels
That's
that
what I was
maybe
just
has a
gonna
few
say.
other things happening, that is able to produce maybe not 100% of its own energy, but is producing enough that you don't have to worry about some of those concerns with sort of the distribution system or fueling stations or things like that. That would be my dream. The technology behind that and how to maintain that would probably be a huge problem, but you know, that's one that we could tackle as well.
Yeah, who knows what will happen in the near future with the technology. When you first said a vehicle that can produce its own energy, the thing that popped into my head was what you then said subsequently to that, which was solar. I mean, if you had the ability to put solar panels all over a big plow and have it work, I guess that would be the ultimate thing, right?
That would be great.
But it's just not there like we were talking about. So what do you think? Maureen said her ultimate dream scenario. What do you think the future is, and what do you think the future is, and what is your dream scenario for these big trucks?
My dream scenario is 100% alternative fuel vehicles in our fleet. That way we can significantly reduce the carbon footprint as well as any other emission related issues that come from traditional fossil fuels.
All right, well, we'll have to see what happens with all of this because technology is changing so quickly, and 5, 10 years, who knows where we're going to be, right? We just don't know yet.
That's
But you're on the right path, and maybe this is the best possible path that you're on currently with the technology we have. Who knows, right?
I agree.
Okay, I'd like to thank today's guests, Jason Nort, the Fuel Management Officer for the DC Department of Public Works, and Maureen Holman, the Vice President of Shared Services at DC Water. You've been watching the Energy Strategy Series. I'm your moderator, Nick Iannelli. For more information, visit WTOP.com and search Clean Fuels Alliance America. Welcome and thanks for joining us. Our guests today include Paul Winters, the Director of Public Affairs and Federal Communications for Clean Fuels Alliance America, and also Colin Hyler, the Chief Executive Officer at Optimus Technologies Incorporated. Thank you so much both for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We're going to talk about biodiesel, some of the benefits, maybe the definitions that people don't quite understand. Let's start with you, Paul. What is biodiesel and what makes it different than traditional fuels?
So biodiesel is made from renewable resources. Fats, oils, greases is the general term for those raw materials. They come from vegetable oils from crops. They come from used cooking oil. They come from recycled animal fats and byproducts from other industries. Corn ethanol production produces a distiller's corn oil that is used for biodiesel production because essentially it's not consumable as a food source. Biodiesel is made through a basic chemical process, transesterification.
Transesterification?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's a chemical reaction between the fats and oils and an alcohol, usually methanol, in the presence of a catalyst. Very simple chemical reaction that we've been doing for about 30 years now. There are other types of renewable diesel fuels. So traditional refining processes can be used with fats and oils to produce a renewable diesel. It meets the same specifications and standards as traditional diesel fuel, so it's a drop-in replacement. Again, it uses the infrastructure that's already built around diesel production.
So Colin, tell us what you do at Optimus Technologies and how you're involved with biodiesel.
Yeah, so as Paul mentioned, there's kind of two different types of replacement diesel fuel: biodiesel and renewable diesel. And with biodiesel, engines today are compatible with biodiesel blends into traditional diesel up to about a 20% blend. And so that's a 20% mix of biodiesel with 80% biodiesel, or 80% petroleum diesel. Apologies. What Optimus does, we build a technology to upgrade diesel engines to actually enable them to operate on 100% biodiesel. So you get the full advantage and benefits that biodiesel brings as a low carbon fuel. And so our technology that we manufacture bolts on to existing engines. They can be engines that are already operating in the field today, so trucks that are already in operation, or they can be new trucks as they get manufactured. So we're helping to facilitate that transition to a low carbon future by using and leveraging existing infrastructure and existing trucks.
So Colin, how would you describe that process of adapting a traditional diesel engine and incorporating the biodiesel? Is that a costly, difficult process? Is that an easy process? How would you characterize it for people who don't know?
Yeah, I'd describe it as a fairly simple upgrade. It does bolt on to existing engines, so there's no permanent modifications. It doesn't require completely rebuilding or replacing the engine like other technologies might. And from a cost standpoint, our approach is to help customers to achieve their emission reductions and their carbon reduction goals in the most cost-effective manner possible. The upgrade of the technology is relatively small compared to the total cost of the vehicle, and the installation takes about 24 hours. So it's a relatively simple process, relatively quick, and very capital efficient, especially when you're looking at other types of technologies, particularly, our focus is the heavy duty vehicle sector. So large assets like snow plows, like garbage trucks, like Class 8 tractor trailers that are moving goods coast to coast. And when you start to look at those types of vehicles, one of the alternatives that gets considered a lot is electrification, and those vehicles plus the infrastructure and all the requirements can be hundreds of thousands of dollars more, even into the millions of dollars more for the vehicles and infrastructure, versus upgrading to run on biodiesel, which might be $20,000 to $30,000 more per truck.
So back to you, Paul. Cities around the country, including here in Washington, D.C., there are initiatives in place to switch certain fleets over to biodiesel. Like Colin was just talking about, these big trucks that city Department of Public Works departments use, things like plows, other large vehicles that you see driving down the street. When you think about those types of vehicles switching to biodiesel, what are some of the environmental effects that are positive when you switch over to biodiesel?
Yeah, absolutely. So biodiesel, because it's made from renewable resources, does not have a lot of the chemicals that are in petroleum diesel, that the hydrocarbons that don't get completely burned in the engine when it's running. So you immediately reduce the criteria pollutants coming from the diesel engine by half.
Okay.
Using biodiesel. That has benefits in terms of the health impacts on communities. The diesel exhaust is well known to impact things like cancer rates, heart disease, asthma rates within communities. You can cut the emissions by half, and you can cut those impacts by at least half, as much as 2/3.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So we commissioned a study over it was done in phases over several years. We worked with Trinity Consultants, and they studied DC in particular. The cancer rates that are attributable to diesel emissions in DC affect maybe as many as 900 people over a 70-year span within the city limits. And by cutting those emissions in half, you can immediately reduce those cancer rates by half to 2/3. And the cost savings associated with that in terms of the healthcare costs run up to about $250 million per year. So you can translate those health benefits to savings for the community, better conditions for the community, increased outdoor activity rates and days,
Sure.
Avoiding lost work days. All of those have economic benefits for the community.
So there's the environmental part, there's the healthcare part that you mentioned. How about the vehicle itself? Does it become more efficient once it switches to biodiesel? For instance, can you drive farther with a vehicle that is on biodiesel when you compare it to a vehicle that's on traditional diesel?
Yeah, so we've done studies. 2 years ago, we released a 1.3 million mile study that we did comparing the use of 100% biodiesel to equivalent vehicles that were operating on traditional diesel. And we saw a number of benefits in terms of enhanced performance of the vehicle itself. So with biodiesel, you get better lubrication, so less wear and tear on the engine itself, which can extend the longevity of the engine and reduce service. As Paul had indicated, there's between 50 and 70% reduction in the particulate emissions that come from an engine that's operating on biodiesel, and so that extends the interval of what these engines have that are called after treatment systems. So they're environmental filters that go onto the engines, and they don't need to be cleaned as often. So actually using biodiesel helps extend the maintenance intervals. And then we also did see from that study an improvement in fuel efficiency. So engines that are operating on biodiesel got better performance, better fuel economy than the diesel counterparts.
So, Paul, would you say that you're seeing progress around the country with these large fleets, like we said, here in Washington, other cities, turning their large trucks into biodiesel trucks? Are you seeing that on a widespread basis around the country? Is it up to what you want to see? Would you like to see more? Tell us about the progress.
So we do see a lot of fleets around the country using biodiesel in blends between 5 and 20%, because that's what the engine manufacturers will certify for their engines. We see progress in terms of fleets moving to higher blends, B100, with DC leading the way. You see progress in New York, Madison, Wisconsin, Ames, Iowa, where those fleets are moving to 100% because they're recognizing the benefits and they see the fuel becoming more and more available. So we think the experience with the lower blends are going to lead to demand for the higher blends. And we do see a lot of fleets around the country using up to B20 already.
You mentioned the availability of biodiesel. Biodiesel is not exactly something that you can just pull off to the side of the highway and get, right? It's not like that.
In certain parts of the country, yes, you can.
Okay.
California is probably the biggest example.
Okay.
Where
do you see a lot of biodiesel gas stations in California when you drive around?
You see a lot of fuel stations that will blend biodiesel with renewable diesel.
Okay.
Because that renewable diesel is meets the diesel spec. You can blend like a B20 renewable 80% blend. So you're seeing those at fuel stations in California.
Is that something that you'd like to see more throughout the country?
Absolutely. And we'd also like to see the extension of use of B100 around the country as well. And that's going to rely on technologies like Optimus Technologies vector system. It's going to rely on continued work with the equipment manufacturers to certify those blends above B20. And the fuel quality continues to increase. So as cities get more and more experience, as fleets get more and more experience with using the higher blends, that we think there's going to be increased demand. And in fact, we're with the initiatives that nearly every company, nearly every city and state are adopting to improve the environment, we are seeing more and more fleets demand biodiesel.
So, Colin, what do you think the near future looks like for vehicles like this? Do you think that the trend is going to continue with biodiesel? Do you think we're going to see more electric? Where do you think this is going? We don't know how technology is going to impact things 10 years down the road. It's rapidly developing all the time, obviously, but what do you think? Where is this all going in the near future?
Yeah, what we see is a pretty dramatic uptick in fleets that are looking for solutions to help them lower their carbon emissions, reduce the pollutants that are coming out of the engines, and just looking for strategies that can help them excel, whether it's private fleets or public fleets, like what's happening in the District of Columbia there. And I think that there has been a lot of momentum towards electrification, but electrification is a really good technology, at least in today's capacity, for lighter duty vehicles. And when you look at the work that's necessary of these heavy vehicles, they're the ones who actually have the largest footprints in terms of contributing to pollution and carbon emissions. Right, these vehicles are working, sometimes 24 hours a day in snow emergencies, clearing the roads, and so more and more we're seeing fleets look to biodiesel as the solution to help them hit their environmental goals, help improve local air quality, and help them just get more out of the equipment that they're already operating. So, I see a really, really bright future, and, I think there's a lot of promising technologies and a lot of promising development that needs to occur in parallel. But one of the biggest advantages of biodiesel is that it can be deployed today and make an impact today. And that's really what we're seeing. We're seeing municipal fleets, we're seeing private fleets really start to deploy and start to aggressively grow their use of biodiesel because of the substantial impact that it can have in their operations today.
So Colin, the work that you do, does it involve building completely new engines? Do you produce engines, or do you take existing engines and modify them? Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so that's one of the advantages of the technology, is that we don't actually have to remanufacture the entire engine or replace it. What we build is a fuel system that bolts onto an existing engine. So our technology that we manufacture here in the US will bolt on to the existing engines that are already in the trucks. So we're leveraging the investments that fleets have already made. And one of the really interesting things, and something that becomes really meaningful in this transition to low carbon strategies and alternatives, is we're never inhibiting the engine from operating on traditional diesel. So once a fleet has upgraded with our technology, they never lose the ability to run traditional diesel. Obviously, using biodiesel helps capture the environmental benefits that they're seeking, but we provide resiliency and flexibility in their operations for those critical trucks that need to be out there plowing snow, collecting garbage, and delivering freight.
Okay, Paul, so last word, what do you think the near future holds? Is it going to be more biodiesel? Are we going to see a dramatic increase in the coming years, you think? Do you think there's going to be more electric? What do you think the near future holds for this?
Yeah, I think the demand for solutions to not just carbon, but to, these criteria, pollution, emissions, and the health impacts that we know are occurring, are going to lead to demand for all solutions across the board. And to fit the budgets that are available in city fleets and other commercial fleets to fit the duty cycles for these heavy duty vehicles, you're going to need all these solutions at the same time. I believe the DC fleet is something like 400 of these heavy duty vehicles. They have to be in use consistently because they perform very critical services.
Yeah.
And, to take anything out of the mix of these solutions just doesn't make sense. You have to use
Someone's got to pick up the
everything.
garbage, got to have the garbage trucks and plows, got to plow the streets, right?
Absolutely. And, in emergencies where the electric grid goes down, you have to have a fleet of trucks that restores those lines, and they run on diesel.
All right, very good. I'd like to thank today's guests, Paul Winters, the Director of Public Affairs and Federal Communications for Clean Fuels Alliance America, and Colin Heiler, the Chief Executive Officer at Optimus Technologies Incorporated. You've been watching the Energy Strategy Series. I'm your moderator, Nick Iannelli. For more on this discussion, visit WTOP.com and search Clean Fuels Alliance America.